And very interestingly, it was towards the end of June that Professor Bibek Debroy very kindly, in fact, very kindly delivered in July, delivered the second Bankim Chandra Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay Memorial Oration. And the topic was AatmaNirbhar Bharat in the historical consciousness of India. And today, he has very kindly consented to deliver a special address, part of our special address series. The last special address was delivered by Honorable Finance Minister on AatmaNirbhar Bharat. And today we have Professor Bibek Debroy, who's going to address us on the momentous and historic developments that have taken place in the farm sector and Prime Minister's vision of an AatmaNirbhar Krishi. Now, I don't want to get into introducing Professor Bibek Debroy because I think he's more than well known by the majority of us. But I would like to say that he's a very interesting and unique personality who perhaps combines in himself and who perhaps straddles the worlds of policy making and scriptures very easily and very uniquely. He brings to us the strength, the wisdom, the affirmation of our civilizational thought and of our perennial scriptures. And on the other hand, he brings to us the rigor, the minute analysis, the succinct expression and articulation of policy making, and especially in the last 6 years of policy making that leads to the making of New India. We have had the good fortune in Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation of having his constant guidance, his support, and his unconditional support and direction in any policy initiative that we have undertaken in the past. Friends, I want to, before requesting Professor Bibek Debroy to deliver his special address, I want to make two observations. One is Prime Minister Modi spoke about the reform in the farm sector as a watershed moment in the history of Indian agriculture. And he said this will ensure a complete transformation of the agriculture sector as well as empower crores of farmers. He said for decades, the Indian farmer was bound by various constraints and bullied by middlemen. The bills passed by Parliament liberate the farmers from such adversities. These bills will add impetus to the efforts to double income of farmers and ensure greater prosperity for them. I would also like to welcome here many eminent personalities have joined us here. Sitting members of Parliament, former members of Parliament, policy makers, and analysts and commentators from across the board. I would like to welcome all of them to this discussion today. I would request, without much ado, I would like to request Professor Bibek Debroy to kindly address us on this very important topic of the day, to tell us what it is all about, and so that we can better understand this and become disseminators of the right narrative, disseminators of the narrative which is in line with India's national interest and which is in line with the vision of a new India. Thank you so much, Professor Bibek Debroy.
Good evening. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be invited to speak under the banner, under the umbrella of the Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation. In this medium that we are constrained to use now, it is somewhat difficult to recognize faces, but to the extent I can, I do recognize some familiar faces. I was a bit worried at seeing a turban, but I see that the turban is on a familiar head. So hello to all my friends and acquaintances. Dr. Ganguly asked me to talk about reforming the farm sector. There's been a lot of debate on the farm sector. There's been a lot of discussion on the farm sector. There's been a lot of commentary on the farm sector in the newspapers. So what is there that I bring to the table in terms of value addition? So therefore, I thought I would flag some issues normally don't think about, a little bit away immediate changes in statutes that have been done. Firstly, the share of agriculture. Share of agriculture in national income being defined as either gross domestic product, GDP, or gross value, GVA. The share of agriculture in national income is not that high. 14%, thereabouts, give or take 1 percentage point here or there, 14%. Share of agriculture will decline with development as it has in many other countries. But whatever trajectory we project in terms of the importance of industry and services in national income, it is unrealistic to presume that in the next 20 years or so, the share of agriculture in national income will drop to below 10%. But there's a share in national income and there is a share in employment. Roughly about 65% of the population lives in rural India. And one often tends to presume that people who work and live in rural India necessarily earn their living from agriculture. That's not quite correct. If one looks at the national sample, the question the NSS asks is, what is your primary occupation? And when one says that 55% of the population earns a living from, please let us recognize that that is in response to that question, what is your primary source? Most people who live in rural India not only have a primary source of income in agriculture, they have a secondary source in other areas outside conventional agriculture. Let us also recognize that as the farm sector, as the agricultural sector modernizes, there will be a greater emphasis on food processing, trade, transportation. Purely the national income accounts point of view, any impetus that food processing, trade, transportation, even if that is of agricultural produce, any impetus these other sectors receive will lead not to a contribution of agriculture in national income, but to a contribution of sometimes industry and more often than not, services in national income. We are in the midst, despite COVID, we are in the midst of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals have one particular, everyone listening in knows that the SDG structure.
Please, Amit Yadav, kindly keep yourself muted.
Everyone listening in knows that the SDGs has a targets and indicators. And one of these is on reducing food and food waste. There is a important difference between food loss and food waste. Food loss is what we are typically concerned with in so-called developing countries like. What is food loss? Food loss is loss that happens in production, post-harvest processing and distribution. In other words, food loss is what happens before the product reaches the final consumer. Whereas food waste is what happens when that food is wasted by the consumer. We often tend to think that there is no food waste in the world. Not at all true. In the developed countries, such as the United States, there is a tremendous amount of food waste. And in the process of development, it's almost as if one transits from food loss to food waste. But as I said, we are concerned mostly with food waste, food loss. Why is there food loss? There is food loss because there is a long chain between the farm and the fork. There is a long chain between the farm and the fork, and at every stage of the chain, there is a loss. Because of the Sustainable Development Goals, because of the emphasis placed on food loss in the Sustainable Development Goals, there have been studies done in various countries on what kind of food loss happens. And now I'm talking about global figures. This depends on the crop, largely global. At the moment, I'm talking about global. In terms of the crop categories where food loss is maximum, right at the top, we have roots and tubers. Below that, we have fruits and vegetables. Below that, we have meat and animal products, and right at the bottom, we have cereals and pulses. So let me repeat that. Right at the top, roots and tubers. Below that, fruits and vegetables. Below that, meat and animal products, and right at the bottom, cereals and pulses. In India, and this is the point. In India, wait people. I think
request everyone to please keep yourselves muted. Yes, Professor Debroy.
This is important. In India, invariably interpreted agricultural policy as a rice and wheat policy, and I will come back to this again. As Indian agriculture moves away from a rice and wheat policy, as the Indian farmer moves away from rice and wheat. As there is greater commercialization and there is greater diversification, note what I said earlier, that the food loss issue becomes even more important. One is moving away from cereals and pulses, one is moving towards meat and animal products, one is moving towards fruits and vegetables, which global figures suggest are much more susceptible to food loss and are therefore much more susceptible to the problem that I mentioned of intermediation and inefficient intermediation of that chain from farm to fork. I gave you global indications, but there are figures that have been also done for India on the extent of this farm loss. Such exercises started in 1962. The last robust one I have seen is something that was done by the Indian Council of Agricultural Research in Ludhiana, and this was done, if I recall correctly, in 2012. So it's not very old. Indian Council of Agricultural Research, it was a Ludhiana study. If I recall, it was in the year 2012. So let me quickly give you some figures of the extent of this food loss that we are talking about. Cereals, these are Indian figures now. Cereals, 4 to 7%. Pulses, 4 to 6%. Oil seeds, anything between 3 to 10%. Fruits and vegetables, anything between 6 to 19%. Milk, not that much. Meat, anything between 2 to 4%. Those figures we need not remember. What we need to remember and register is that disintermediation must take place, because it means a better price for farmers without necessarily resulting in a higher price for consumers. I'm supposed to talk about the farm sector. So I'm supposed to talk about farmers. How many farmers are there in India? What is the total number of farmers in India? There are farmers who are registered under the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi. Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi, farmers can register. This is on the basis of self-declaration. Certain categories of farmers are excluded. Ex-MPs, ex-MLAs, those who get pension more than 10,000 rupees, they cannot. And of course, you have to have registered cultivable land. The figure is 111 million. As of today, the figure is 111 million. Farmers are registered in this. I said some categories are excluded. So this 111 million is a little bit like a lower bound. But there is also an agricultural census which is held once every 5 years. The last agricultural census was held in 2015-16. Under the agricultural census of 2015-16, there were 146 million holdings. So 111 million is a lower bound. We can reasonably say that as of 2015-16, there may have been a little bit increase after that because of fragmentation, but at least as of 2015-16, we have 146 million holdings. So roughly speaking, 146 million farmers. But there's a problem. Who is a farmer? In the definition that I just gave you, the definition of a farmer was contingent on owning agricultural land. I can become a farmer only if I own agricultural land. So those figures, 111 million, 146 million, are provided that I own agricultural land. But there are those who earn a living by cultivating land, but don't necessarily own land. As a result of the Swaminathan Commission, there was a draft national policy for farmers in 2006, which never got implemented. That said that the definition of farmer should be broadened to include those who do not hold agricultural land. All right, the Swaminathan Commission recommended it, it wasn't implemented. But in the year 2001, after WTO, in the year 2001, we had a Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. And if you read the definition of farmer under that particular piece of legislation, Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights, you will find that the definition of farmer doesn't have anything to do with owning land. Even if you earn a living from land, you are defined as a farmer under that. So the question I'm flagging before you is, shouldn't we as a collective entity decide who is a farmer? Is the definition of farmer contingent on owning land? Or is agricultural labor also counted as farmer? The reason for this is the interests of the two sets. These are two different hats. It is also true that sometimes people who have small holdings, they work as agricultural labor on someone else's farm. So it's not quite watertight. Nevertheless, it is also the case that sometimes the interests of these two categories may be diametrically opposed. An example of that is if agricultural wages go up, it obviously benefits agricultural labor. But for the landholder, it is an increase in input cost and it squeezes the ability of the landholder. Leaving aside that broader debate, all right, so let us stick to what is currently used. I need agricultural land. That's a prerequisite to becoming a farmer. A prerequisite to becoming a farmer is that I should own agricultural land. So therefore, I have to know who owns what agricultural land. There was a committee that was set up by the UPA. It was a committee that was called State Agrarian Relations and the Unfinished Task in Land Reforms. A committee set up by the UPA, and it submitted a report in the year 2009. And I'm quoting the report of that committee. Last extensive survey and settlement in several states, the survey that I need to update land records, was done 2 or 3 decades before. So we have where the last cadastral survey, according to this report, done in the 1910s. A whole lot of people are very upset with the government. The government is acting against the interests of farmers. Why have these people not been screaming, shouting rooftops, please update the cadastral surveys? How can you have a situation in a country that's in the 21st century where the last cadastral survey goes back more than 100 years? So people, farmers, why have they not been demanding the cadastral surveys be done? Why have they not been demanding that the land record should be updated Not know how many of you are aware, and Anirban, I'm looking at you for this, that in 2017, the West Bengal government abolished land revenue. In 2017, the West Bengal government abolished land revenue. What does it mean? It means I will never be able to update my revenue records beyond the year 2070. So how will I be able to establish who owns land and who does not? The revenue records will be frozen in 2017, and as I said, the definition of farmer is contingent on owning agricultural land. So I will never know who's a farmer in West Bengal after 2070. The government of India has had a centrally sponsored scheme since 2018-19 on modernizing land records. Today, it is known as Digital India Land Records Modernization Program. Long name, Digital India Land Records Modernization Program. And there is a dashboard. On the basis of that dashboard, NCR has ranked states. We're interested in farmers' rights, we're interested in upgradation of land records. So NCAR, forget the government dashboard. NCAR, an external body, has ranked states on how well they have done. 2020 is the latest year for which we have the rankings. Which are the top 3 states in NCAR's rankings? Uttar Pradesh, Odisha, and Maharashtra. Top 3 states, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Maharashtra. The leading state of Green Revolution, Punjab, Haryana. Punjab, a state that's been protesting the most. Where are Punjab and Haryana in this ranking? Punjab is ranked 16th. Haryana is ranked 18th. I repeat, until you have the surveys, digitization, modernization is garbage in, garbage out. So you need to have the surveys, the resurveys. That dashboard, now I'm not an NCAR, I'm now on the dashboard. That dashboard says that surveys and resurveys have been done in 11.5% of India's villages. Exactly 11.5%. Our hearts bleed for farmers. We take to the streets. We are not really concerned that the surveys have not been done in 88.5% of India's villages. How many surveys and resurveys have been done in Punjab? According to this dashboard, 0%. Agriculture is a state largely. And if the land records are not updated, some farmers will be left out. We are debating the issue of farmers. This is a union of various states. So surely we should have a definition of whose farmer that is uniform throughout the country. Surely we should have a uniform definition about who can own agricultural land. The definition of who can own agricultural land and thereby become a farmer varies enormously from state to state. In areas, you will have plenty of people who live in farmhouses. There are entire complexes of farmers who have nothing to do with farming. Surely as a collective entity, we should decide regardless of federalism, who is a farmer. In the midst of COVID, the government in April announced something known as the Swamitha scheme, which is a form of conferring property rights using modern technology like drones to people who have houses, so that those can be used for collateral, getting loans, other things. Launched in April 2020 on a pilot basis. Recently, I met someone who was trying to preach to me about Hernando de Soto and the mystery of capital. Also, the mystery of capital was a great book. Hernando de Soto's 89 book was an even better book, because the mystery of capital was built on the 89 book. And sure, we need property rights. So I asked him, are you aware of the Swamitha scheme? No. What is the Swamitha? So therefore, on land, surely we should raise our voices. Moving to the agricultural census, 146 agricultural holdings. If I'm interested in the voice of the farmer, whose voice am I interested in? Which farmers are the most important? In terms of operated area, out of these 146 million holdings, the largest agricultural areas are in Rajasthan, Maharashtra, UP and MP. This is important. Number of holdings, the largest, most number of holdings are in UP, Bihar, Maharashtra, MP. Are their voices important? 86% of holdings are small and marginal, less than 2 hectares. Aren't their voices important? Or should the country be held to ransom by the voices of the large farmers, those who own more than 10 hectares, who own exactly 0.6% of holdings? We should ask the farmer. Everyone listening in knows that in 1991, reforms. I used to have a friend. He was considerably, but nonetheless, I could call him a friend. Sharad Anantarao Joshi, Sharad Joshi, of Shetkarish Sangathan. And he used to constantly abuse me, saying, Bibek, don't give me this rubbish about reforms having been introduced. Reforms are about competition efficiency. There has been choice, there's been competition only for industry and manufacturing, and to some extent for services. Where is the choice for the farmer? Inputs are controlled, production is controlled, stocks are controlled, distribution are controlled, everything is controlled. So when is farmer free? This is a rhetorical question that Sharad Joshi used to ask. Governments act on behalf of farmers, or we presume they do. So here is a state like Kerala, which has never had a APMC Act. Does that mean Kerala is not interested in farmers? We have states like Bihar, UP and Gujarat, which had APMC Acts but moved away from APMC. Does that mean these states are not interested in the farmer? Obviously, the states think that the APMC Acts have not worked in the interests of the farmers, to further the interests of the farmers. So I come back to a point that I mentioned earlier: agriculture policy only rice and wheat? Agricultural policy only about procurement of rice and wheat? And let us be very clear, MSP is a minimum support price. MSP is not supposed to be a procurement price. That's not how it started. Minimum support price is the floor. Procurement has got nothing to do with MSP. I need to mention Lord Linlithgow. I have privately mentioned this story, but I need to mention Lord Linlithgow. This is intermission time, so I'm taking a slight break and telling you an anecdote. In the year 1973, the Tamil Nadu government set up a commission. 1973. What was the commission supposed to do? The commission was supposed to identify surplus government jobs and recommend their abolition. When this commission went about its task, it discovered that there were some posts called LBAs and LBKs. Except no one knew what LBAs did and what LBKs did, because the existing LBAs and LBKs had all retired and were drawing pensions. So these people were called. LBAs and LBKs who had retired and were drawing pensions, please tell us, what did you do? And then the story came out. In the year 1926, there was a Royal Commission on Agriculture. The chairman of that Royal Commission was Lord Linlithgow. It was supposed to improve Indian agriculture, and it had several recommendations. One of those recommendations was that Indian cattle are of inferior species. So you must import foreign bulls and use those to impregnate Indian cows so that the species improves. No one paid the slightest bit of attention to the commission's reports, as typically happens in government, until suddenly it was announced that Lord Linlithgow was going to be the new Viceroy come Governor General. Suddenly it announced that Lord Linlithgow was going to be the new Governor General and Viceroy. One particular bureaucrat, civil servant in what was then Madras Presidency woke up and realized that Lord Linlithgow would turn up in India and want to know what happened to my recommendations. In the government, scrapping a job is difficult, creating a job is also difficult. And this person thought that the best way to create a job was to invoke the Viceroy's name in the job description itself. LBK stood for Linlithgow's Bull Keeper. Linlithgow's Bull Keeper imported the bulls, maintained them. But since subsidy involved, there was LBA, Linlithgow's Bull Assistant, who was meant to ensure that the impregnation. These posts were abolished finally in the 70s. What has this got? The reason I mentioned is, believe it or not, the APMC Acts go back to the recommendations of Lord Linlithgow's Royal Commission on Agriculture. That's how old they are. That's where the antecedents are. Yes, for Berar and Cotton earlier, and economic historians have analyzed what happened for Berar and Cotton and arrived at the unambiguous conclusion that whatever was done in Berar and Cotton was primarily to ensure cheap cotton supplies to Lancashire and Manchester. It did not really benefit farmers. It was an indirect tax on farmers. And the money thereby gained was not really used to develop infrastructure. Of course, after Lord Linlithgow, there was a model APMC bill. Several states passed it. There have been several good studies on Indian agriculture. National Commission on Agriculture, 1976. National Commission of Farmers, Swaminathan Commission, I mentioned this, 2004. Most remarkable of all, at the turn of the millennium, Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India, not this government, Ministry of Agriculture under the then government, brought, hold your breath, a 27-volume study on called State of the Indian Farmer. One entire volume, that volume 7, was on agricultural marketing. It was by S.S. Arya. People who have long memories like Charan Singh will remember him, chairman of CACP once upon a time. And all of these commissions, etc., have documented very clearly that these regulated markets which the APMC Acts mandated did not really benefit the bulk of the farmers. To divulge a secret, in the 90s, worked as an advisor in finance ministry. And until I found a solution, I had a terrible problem. Suddenly a file would come to me. My job was, my portfolio was balance of payments. Suddenly a file would come to me, typically at 5:25 in the evening, saying that the duty drawback rate on X item is 5.15%. It is proposed to increase it to 5.19%. 5 files would never explain to me what 5.5% in the first place and why it would be 5.19% now. So I had sleepless nights for 5 days, and then I arrived at a solution. Anything proposed by Commerce Ministry then, oppose. Exactly in terms of government policy, anything that was done in India between the second half of the 1960s and the first half of the 1980s to me is a red flag. Anything done between the second half of the 1960s and the first half of the 1980s is that. And I can give you countless examples of this. If increase in regulated markets, if you look at the increased passing of APMC Acts, they were all concentrated in this period. And economic policy making in this particular period may have been done in the name of the poor or in the name of the farmer. It did not benefit the farmer at all. Lord Linlithgow, Royal Commission on Agriculture, I mentioned that. One of its recommendations was the market committee should not have a licensed broker as a member. I live in Delhi. It was easy for me to check Azadpur Mandi. Azadpur Mandi members are not just farmers, they are traders and commission agents. So the question is, whose interest is Azadpur Mandi committee reflecting? Economic survey in 2014-15, which documented how much is paid these for rice and wheat. For rice, and this is not just when I am mandated, when I am forced to go to a APMC market, it is not just the ordinary market fee. By the way, in taxes, there's a difference between a fee and a tax. no control over. These things are supposed to be fees. They are meant, there's supposed to be a quid pro quo. And it is indeed at the time of the Green Revolution, these mandi fees were used in Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP to develop infrastructure. The question is, when I give you the figure, is all of that being used for that purpose? So what is the total amount of the economic survey for rice? Andhra, 19.5%. Punjab, 14.5%. Farmers do not have the right to know what this is being used. And is this not excessive? Similar economic, again, Punjab 14.5%, 11.5%. This government is being blamed. There was a parliamentary committee, 60-second report. Someone again. Please be patient. I'm almost at the end. Can you please mute yourself again?
Yes, I think it's gone clear. The problem is some here would like to continuously listen to their inner voices, and that's why it's. Please carry on, Professor Debroy. Kindly carry on.
60-second report, 2018-19. Agricultural marketing and the role of weekly Gramin Hearts. Very educative, because it tells us that most farmers don't actually sell in those regulated markets. They sell in the weekly hearts. We still do not have a cogent figure on how many weekly hearts there are. Some figures are 34,000, some figures are 41,000, some figures are 28,000. In Punjab and Haryana, according to the National Commission on Farmers, there should have been a market within a radius of 5 kilometers, which roughly pi r square means that the total area would have been 79 square kilometers. Punjab, the area catered to is 116, not too bad. Haryana, 157. Himachal, 994. So the person who's growing apples from Himachal brings it to Azadpur Mandi. Goes through nothing in Azadpur Mandi, but he has to bring it to Azadpur Mandi if he is going to sell it in Delhi, and he has to pay Azadpur Mandi 6%. For what? How does this benefit Himachal's farmers? So the critical issue is opening up alternative marketing channels. And there is a long list of recommendations even before this government. In 2001, there was a report of a task force on agricultural market norms. All the CMs were part of that. There was a standing committee of CMs in Delhi in 2002. They agreed to this. There was a National Conference of Agricultural Ministers in 2004. They agreed to this. There is ENAM, which reflects what farmers want, what state governments want. All of this in the Essential Commodities Act goes back to a period when we artificially created shortages. The Essential Commodities Act, by the way, is an enabling provision under which, not very long ago, the price at which we could buy an automobile used to be determined by the government. We have done away with that for manufacturing. Isn't it time to do away with it for farmers? The reforms happened in 1991. But there was a long history of committees which had submitted recommendations. And this was not just IMF, World Bank recommendations, as the left argues. To my mind, the most significant committee was a committee that people have forgotten about, That was the Dagley Committee in 78 on controls and subsidies. Several years down the line after Dagley, industry was freed. I personally think that what has now been done is not a magic wand. There will be no quick fixes overnight, but I think that what has now been done will free up Indian agriculture. It will give the Indian farmer the right to choose which other sectors have benefited from, and it will enable the Indian agriculture, Indian farmer to look away from rice and wheat, to look towards commercialization and diversification, to choose different marketing channels, to decide who to sell to, where to sell, and thereby ensure prosperity and development for the rural sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Debroy. I think, as always, it has been extremely fascinating because I remember in 2015 when you launched our first book, Redefining Governance, and you spoke there in detail. You had the audience absolutely wrapped in attention when you spoke in detail on the number of obsolete laws that have been repealed by the Modi government. And today I was remembering that particular evening, and today with your information-packed special address, I think we have extremely benefited. You have taken us from Linlithgow to Swaminathan, and you have particularly, and you have written about this also in your extremely popular column in the Indian Express and in Shangbad Pratidin earlier, where you say that this right to choose and freeing up Indian agriculture and the right to choose for the farmer, I think that is the key word. You have also spoken to us about the Samitva scheme, which is extremely important in this context, and the number of commissions that you have referred to. I think there is a lot, because a number of seniors as well as young academics and experts are here. There's a lot that can be done today based on what you have said. Especially when you say the second half of 1960s and the first half of 1980s, that also tempts me. We have friends like Bipul Chatterjee here and others. I think we should seriously look at many of the points and propositions and analysis that you have done today. I also realize that you are extremely popular in West Bengal. A number of friends, right from the grassroots upward, have joined us here today, and this has been live streamed as well. And we propose to also bring out a booklet of the transcription, including in Bangla, which is extremely important for people across the board in West Bengal to really understand what you have discussed today. And I think all of us would agree with me that we have extremely benefited, and I know you are extremely hard-pressed for time. You have still found time to give us 1 full hour on this issue. And I want to thank you for your extremely lucid and informative deliberation and your talk. I also realize that Honorable Minister of State for Statistics and Program Implementation, Rao Inderjit Singh, also has been with us throughout this program. I thank him. And I thank all those who have joined us here, cutting across the spectrum: academics, political workers, industry body heads, policymakers, commentators across the board who have joined us today. And I think this was extremely necessary, and in order to understand from one of the top policymakers in this country what this is all about. Thank you so much, Professor Debroy. And I would like to end by exactly what this concept, this term of right to choose that you have made. That's exactly what Prime Minister has also continuously harped upon, that after so many years, after 7 decades, the farmers have now a right to choose. And this is an aspiration, a demand which has been there over the decades. And as Professor Debroy has pointed out, a number of commissions, a number of study reports have in the last few decades spoken and focused on this. And we have seen this finally happening last September. So I think AatmaNirbhar Krishi forms the basis of an Atmanirbhar Bharat, a self-reliant India. And last time when you spoke in July on Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay memorial oration, when you referred to Bankim, it was his Bongo Desher Krishok series of articles that he wrote on the plight of farmers in Bengal, which has again come back to us today in the form of, this has been a decisive step. So from Linlithgow to Swaminathan, one can stretch it back from Bankim Chandra to Narendra Modi. This has been a decisive step towards becoming self-reliant. Thank you so much, Professor Debroy. And I would like to thank all eminent friends who have joined us here today. I want to thank many seniors. Professor Bibi Datta is also here, former member of parliament, who has also joined us from Shillong. Charan Singh ji, who is so kindly joined us here today. We also have Shri Sajinarayan ji, who has been one of the longest serving national presidents of the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, who is also with us today, and many other friends who have joined us. Thank you so much. Thank you.